All right, there's Denise. Let me move her over. All right. Good evening and welcome to the Neary Building Committee. It's Monday, April 22nd, 2024. It is 7:34 p.m. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of our 7 voting members present. I believe Chris is going to try to join us, but he couldn't guarantee it due to some other conflicts. And welcome to our ex officio members this evening as well. First order of business is approval of the outstanding meeting minutes. We have 2 of them, 3/25 and 4/1. Questions or comments on either? Everyone okay if I move them together, or do you want to move them as 2 separate votes?
Together's fine.
I'm
All right.
fine with together.
All right, I'll move that we approve the meeting minutes of March 25, 2024 and April 1, 2024. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mark,
Aye.
Roger,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
Denise,
Aye.
and I am aye as well. So that is a 6-0 vote. Next is a debrief on the open forum. So what I thought we would do is, I know Roger and Denise, you were both present. So if you have any thoughts or comments before I layer in any of my comments, I welcome any thoughts you had. So go ahead, Roger. And I'm going to bring the Skanska and Arrow Street team in as you all talk about that as well. So go ahead, Roger, you have the floor.
Well, we didn't have a ton of people, but we had more than the first forum. I thought that the participants, from town, the people that attended from the town, I thought they had a lot of good comments. So I thought it was a decent meeting, actually.
Denise, anything to add?
I agree. I thought it was a good meeting. I think that the word is getting out, and I think their major concerns, will be addressed along the way. But some of the things, that they were most interested in is the configuration, which, at this point we don't have. What we're actually going to do, we're not really sure. So I think they may have realized that this is just an ongoing process, but there were good questions. I agree. And we had more people. I didn't get to the first one, but from what everybody said, we had more people, which I think is a good thing.
If we're going on multiples, I'd have the attendance at somewhere between 6 to 8 times the attendance of the original one.
Well,
there was some ebb and flow. In just to put in context, we had advertised it as 7 to 8:30. I had to cut it off at 9 o'clock. So that speaks to, I think, the level of engagement. And in particular, and apologies to Katie in particular, we couldn't get through our slides because of the questions, but they were good questions. They weren't because the slides weren't clear. It was just like where people wanted to take the conversation. So that was great. I walked away with at least 3 observations that I think the committee should be aware of. I don't know that it's necessarily a discussion point tonight, but I think it's not going away, and I think it's going to be part of how we educate and think about the process as we go along. There was a ton of commentary, not necessarily questions, but commentary around the disruption that would naturally happen if there's construction, any sort of construction on the Neary site. I know members of this committee have already talked about that, right? And this is renovation, bringing the building up to code or starting fresh with a new building. There's just a lot of commentary. I would say on average, most of the people in that auditorium, at least that evening, spoke to the fact that they will have kids in Neary at some point during the next 4 to 5 years. So that's just something we need to all be aware of and be thinking about. I know Greg and his team in particular, listen to that, right? And are going to have a lot of thinking to do once we figure out what we're actually doing on that site. And Kathleen, I just feel for you as the principal of the school, right? But it was good commentary and incredibly appropriate dialogue to be having. We just don't have the answers yet because we don't know what we're doing. So that was one thing, not that I was surprised by, but it just kept coming back up as we went through it. The second item, and Kathy, this is for you as a select board rep, and Mark, as town administrator. And this was from a senior perspective. There is a clear, at least idea from that constituency of trying to tie the Neary and community center projects together if happens to become available, right? Trying to have those at the same town meeting. There was some discussion around that and thinking about that, right? Like, as opposed to like there was a general thought, I guess I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but if you did the Neary project, and let's just say it was a 4-grade project at the special town meeting, but then you kind of leave the community center concept to the future, there was an idea of trying to tie them together. So again, not something we're going to solve tonight, but it was specifically a request that came from that constituency group. The third was there definitely were proponents from multiple youth sports organizations there to hear like what the impact will be to not only the existing fields, but also how the exterior and interior space may come about, right? And what quote unquote community assets come out of the project. And then finally, there was just a general concept of not having a school on the south side. It was conversational. I don't know that there was any sort of. There's some people like the idea of having at least one school on the south side, but also realized the efficiencies that may come, in particular with the busing situation, with the schools more closely grouped together. Those were my takeaways. Again, not that there's any action items tonight, but it'll be important to monitor all of that as we go. So any questions, anything I said before I go to Roger, because I seem to have raised something there. So Kathy, I'm gonna go to you first because it seems like you have a question on something I said. Then I'll come to Roger for his additional commentary.
So obviously the community center decision is not this committee, so it'd have to be done in parallel, I guess, but that's not our job. That's a different job, but I hear you. Jason, I appreciate your positive spin on the 8 times, but I still say 20 is still not very many people in absolute numbers. But the reason I really raised my hand is one comment that Andrew Dennington, who was there, told me. He said that, and I think it's only one person, didn't want to make a comment or anything because she wanted to wait until the proposal was actually made as far as what we're going to do and then make a comment. And of course, the answer then it's too late. So I don't know what you guys said to that person, but I think we've got to continue to emphasize to people who are tuned in here that now's the time to make the comments. It's not next April or shortly before then. So again, I don't know what you said to this person, but Andrew did point out that she wasn't ready to comment till she knew what we wanted to do.
I don't honestly remember what I said, so I don't know if Roger or
I'm
Denise.
sure it was good, but anyway, so I just want, my point is that, she said it, but we need to keep emphasizing now's the time to comment if you want to comment. If you really want to weigh in and have some input, it's now, not later.
I will say I did get at least a few follow-ups that spoke to the openness that they felt that in particular our consulting team had to commentary, right? To think about how they designed the building. So I thought that was pretty well received. But again, that proves your point, Kathy, right? Is they don't know what people are thinking about, right? And what are, the deal breakers for, whether it's that one person or 19 others, then it's very hard to design a building that's gonna, fully satisfy everyone.
But I did hear good reviews, Jason, about the presentation of you and also of Arrow Street. You got rave reviews. So that part's good. But of course, then we did hear the criticism online about not having a remote option.
And that's coming, and I'll cover that in the communication subcommittee update. So Roger, I'll go back to you.
Two things. Kathy, I recall that the one person that mentioned or that said that she was going to wait. But I do think there was I don't recall exactly the response came from, but there was a response which emphasized we're trying to get input now as a part of making the decision on what to do. So, and I think there was only that one comment, but the other comment that was made by a few people, which I thought was good in that I think it showed me that a lot of the parents feel a bit of a partnership with the faculty. And they wanted to, no one said, we don't think you're getting faculty input, but what they did say was, we hope that you do get faculty input on this, because what the teachers think about this is really very important. So I thought that was a very interesting comment for parents to be making about the teachers, and it does show that there's, as I say, I think maybe a sense of partnership between them. Thank you.
Multiple people said that too, right? So that was not a one person, like one person went on for 4 or 5 minutes about that actually, which was great. And shows obviously the support of the educators. Go ahead, Denise.
I also, to go along with what Kathy said, I think there's a misnomer that we need to correct, that at the end of the stage, they're voting on their ideas of what they want in the school, and that's not at the process. By the time we get to town meeting, this board has decided what we're going to go forward with. And I think there's a misnomer out there that it's going to be a collaborative effort. The collaborative effort comes at this stage where they are giving their input, and then this building committee makes that decision, because I'm afraid they're a little confused. Didn't you think that?
They were certainly confused walking in. I hope if we had a quiz pre and post that
Mhm,
they
mhm,
understood
mhm.
that there's gonna be a lot of decisions that are made, whether people like it or not, over the summer, right? Like there's
That's
gonna be
right.
a lot of framing that occurs. And I think all we can do is continue to educate folks about what we're going to be discussing in our meetings and when, right? So if we get to a meeting where we're trying to decide on which of these options we think is going to be the right path forward, right? You know, trying to advertise as
Mhm,
much of that as possible in
mhm.
finding a way to grab the public comment.
And maybe, just maybe, that I know the superintendent does it, but maybe the principals of all the schools put our web page address on their communication, striving to, before school is out, make them understand that this website is being updated on a daily basis, and they can see what's going on. And they can, and you said it, I mean, they can be on these Zoom meetings, which I think are going to be very important, so that they understand the process as we go.
Any other comments on that?
Well, just one point. We can't tell who's watching on YouTube, right? But we can tell who's watching Zoom. There's one person, the loyal Sam Stivers. So I just think we've got to truly pound in the fact that by the time you get to town meeting, there's one choice. You can vote it down, but you're not going to have not multiple choices, A, B, and C.
Yeah.
To your point, Kathy, there were, that was coming across because it was like, well, we'll decide. I think there were ideas that they were going to be able to then weigh in on at town meeting of what they wanted, and that's not where this is going. Nor can it be.
And we know how much attention people are going to pay over the summer. You know, we know what summer is here.
Yeah.
The good news is, at a bare minimum, even if we have a in-person meeting, it will be hybrid too, right? Like we have the ability to do that. We obviously need to carefully schedule it to make sure it's in the right room. But if we do need to have a in-person meeting, we do have the ability to make sure everything is still recorded as we go. Any other comments in open forum? All right. Subcommittee reports. Finance, Kathy?
This is quick. We haven't met since we met. We've met twice here since we met. We don't meet till this Thursday. So there's nothing new to report. I could repeat what I said 2 minutes ago, but I think it's a waste of our time. So I'll have a report at our next meeting.
Okay. And communications subcommittee has not met since the last meeting as well. However, I am waiting on date availability from Greg in the school administration. He's going to get to it once they get through the Northborough town meeting so that we can have that Zoom open forum that we promised everyone we would have. So the intent would be to repeat the same content in presentation form and then have it webinar format that people can ask questions and it can be recorded. And I have had some discussions with Terry at Southborough Access Media as well to figure out what they can do to kind of help broadcast, differently as well. Questions on communications? All right, I have sustainability in here. I know you three have not met, but you're allowed to meet whenever there's a need. So Jim, I'll look to you and your team to let the three of them know, plus Keith is the ex officio, when they need to meet, but they're officially all set with the town clerk and ready to go when they need to organize a meeting.
Okay, yeah, it probably makes sense to meet fairly shortly, just as a kickoff meeting to kind of lay out the plan for the next, few months at least.
Okay. So reach out to them to availability. I'll help whoever needs help getting that original one coordinated, and then you can all elect your own subcommittee chair to go from there. Okay. Main item for tonight is update from the OPM and design team related to site options. So Jim and Katie, you both have screen sharing. If anyone else needs it, let me know, but I'm going to turn it over to you for whatever you want to walk us through.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to maximize Arrow Street's time tonight, to walk through the options. Jason had sent out an email, laying out the meetings for now until our submission date of May 21st to the MSBA for the PDP. So I'm just going to share my screen. So just a little bit of a roadmap as we walk through the options tonight. So Arrow Street's going to walk through the options tomorrow. They get sent over to PMNC, who is their estimator, to put some numbers to those. Those will be largely square foot cost at this stage with the limited amount of information. So those come back Friday, May 3rd. So the project team will have a little bit of time to review those. That Monday, May 6th, we'll meet with this full group to review those estimates. And again, that's going to be a pretty quick turnaround. Folks won't have a ton of time to review those. So the following Monday, we're going to have a follow-up on the estimates themselves. So everybody, after they've seen the information, kind of processed it, we can have another meeting to review those. So once that's complete, and the estimates have been reviewed by this group, we are going to have the PDP assembled and distributed to the group so that everybody can review all the pieces and parts of it. And that's the Thursday meeting. So why we did Thursday was to give the project team a little bit of time if there were any comments between the 16th and the 21st submittal date. So that night, depending on the discussion, if folks are comfortable with it, we'll vote. If there's a few outstanding questions that the project team needs to follow up on, we can reconvene on Monday, May 20th, to vote the PDP, and then that following day we would submit it to the MSBA. So again, just to give everybody context of where we're going between now and the 21st, a lot of work between now and the submittal date. But, I think this gives folks a lot of time to review, process, ask questions prior to the submission to the MSBA. So any questions on the schedule itself?
I'll just make a comment, Jim, is like if people have issues with the dates, and I fear you have, and these are going to be important discussions, right? So I will work with folks to try to make it work if we're going to be anywhere close to a quorum. and I realize it's challenging. It's very challenging for my schedule too. So I guess if people have like true known conflicts, we are going to be starting later to try to avoid some of the sports conflicts to maximize our participation. Just let me know sooner rather than later so I can coordinate with the team here to figure out what we need to accomplish and change as needed.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, these dates, we obviously tried to stick with Mondays, that we put the Thursday in there for the reasons but yeah, we can obviously adjust as long as, I think the biggest thing is that we do meet, twice on each of these, on the estimates, making sure we have that time. But yeah, we can definitely, as Jason said, make some adjustments if need be.
Jim, if we're just doing square footage, can we get PM&C to do it a little faster than that? I mean, it seems a little long for a square footage estimate.
So we want to give them plenty of time. They are square foot costs, but there are other factors. So we actually had them shift this date up. It was going to be a little later.
Okay.
But I think that's reasonable for the number of options that we do have. And I think there is time there for basically, a full week for folks to be able to look at those.
Any other questions on that or comments? All right, Jim, keep rolling, or I don't know if you're turning to
Yep.
Katie.
No, yeah, I'll turn over to Katie and Larry to run through options.
Okay. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Just gonna adjust my settings so that I can see everyone. Okay. First, we wanted to talk a little bit about the existing conditions on the site itself. We had several of our consultants out this week looking at different aspects. One of them was looking more specifically at they were taking some soil borings and things along those lines. And our environmental consultant reached out to us and said that they wanted to talk about some of the site constraints that they observed while they were on site. As most of you probably know, there is a brook that runs through at the edge of the wetlands. That will have a river setback, which is one aspect of this diagram that you're seeing here. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit so that people can read some of these titles that we have. We use this site plan for a lot of different things, so some of the text is a little small. So in addition to the river, there is also a wetland. The information that we have currently on the wetland is based from GIS software that's available online, or excuse me, a GIS website that's available online. So it is an estimate. What we've shown here is our estimated setbacks, starting with the 100-foot wetland setback, which we know we need to maintain. We've given ourselves a 20-foot wetland buffer, just since we don't know the exact constraints of it now until they actually go out and flag it and review it with the Conservation Commission. In order to know, well, we know that we would be safe to build outside of the 200-foot setback. So we're really trying to target somewhere between the 100 and the 200 until we have more information. At some point fairly soon, probably maybe in the summertime, we need to get our consultant out in conjunction with the Conservation Commission and talk about the requirements, their requirements for where we can be within this zone and to observe the actual conditions that are in place right now. He did say that he saw quite a bit of standing water or groundwater being very high. I think we all know, I'm also going to zoom out again, that this site is that where the school sits is flat and all around it is sloping up. So as you can imagine, all the water is running down to, underneath. So there is quite a bit of water present all around this site. They did observe a little of the parking where it was heaving because of groundwater and that. And then in addition to the right-hand side on this plan that we're showing right now, on the left, there's also another wetland area. So we have to observe similar setbacks on that side. As you'll see a little bit later in the presentation, we have been considering in most of our build options to build on the fields. And we just wanted to show this diagram and say that these are the sort of things that we are investigating as we look at where we intend to build. There is some opportunity within the wetland buffer, but we need to talk about it carefully and talk about all the authorities having jurisdiction so that we don't run afoul of any of their requirements. So preliminary view of this, obviously there's some portion of the field that now is perhaps a little bit constrained until we know a bit more. One suggestion from our environmental agent was that we could also potentially build here, if you can all see the hand on the screen in front of the building. But these are options that we're going to continue to explore. That's the quick high level. Does anyone have any questions?
Katie,
So,
you might, I'm sorry, Kathy, we might talk about the sewage leaching field, which is the other thing that we've been chasing down.
So currently we understand that the leach field is here where you're seeing it up in this brown box. We had a few different sets of documents from different points. There's an assessor's map from, I think it's either 1995 or 1997 that shows it in this location. We had some other diagrams that were given to us by Keith Lavoie and his team that showed something here, which is why we had a box there. But we believe that that particular plan was a proposed addition to Neary that was going to be here that never got built. So all of the information that we have currently from what our consultant was able to observe on site indicates that this is where the leach field currently exists. I was going to reach out again to Keith Lavoie. We had been told verbally that people believed that the leach field was here under this field, but we cannot find any evidence of it. And I see Mark is nodding along or shaking his head along. You think we have the correct location. Great. We're also going to reach out to the Board of Health and see what information they might have just to confirm that. And see if there's any information about the capacity of it as well, because we understand it's probably undersized or at least sized for the 305 school. And if we were to build anything larger, we need to understand what its current capacity is.
Katie, have you heard the name Paul Pazinski?
I have not.
So he's the man you want to talk to, and the Board of Health can refer you to him. He was the former Board of Health, head of the Board of Health. And his focus was septic, and he knows this building very well. He knows the septic system really well. So I would definitely make sure that you confirm everything with him before you're done. And he would be happy to help.
That's wonderful. If anybody has, if you have contact information, Kathy, or if anyone else does, if Jason does, maybe.
It'll in the intro email I sent to the Board of Health with you copied on it, they'll have what you need there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mark, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just two quick items. Over on the, as I'm staring at this, over to the left with that water area. Yeah, right in there. On one of the plans that was passed around, there was circled the furthest water area to the left in there, that there was a potential vernal pond.
Okay.
It may be overrun with water because of the water table issues right now, but it might be something that we should be looking at because that triggers another buffer.
Sure.
That can't be violated. And now's the time for the state to go out and certify those things.
Okay.
Sorry,
go ahead.
The other issue is where that other little septic system was placed. That's the area where there is groundwater outflow.
Yes, we did observe that.
Okay, and if they're out there, we're gonna have, obviously now even more so, if we've got less land to work with, we're gonna have to look at that.
There were
That's-
also a few monitoring wells up along here. Sounds like you know what's what on this. We were going to investigate those monitoring wells as well. They're along this slope. We weren't sure exactly what they were monitoring, so.
I'm not sure unless something was coming down from Flag Road, but
Mhm.
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay,
That's it.
very good. Any other questions? Okay. Next, we were going to do a quick little recap, especially for any of the folks who haven't, who are just tuning in and haven't been at any of these previous meetings. And it plays into a little bit what we're going to start talking about in some of our different options and scenarios. And we just wanted to talk quickly about some of the things that floated to the top through the ed planning about adjacencies, and sort of the educational uses and types of classrooms and things that we want to start incorporating into our design. So these seem pertinent when you start seeing the options later. So we were talking a little bit about the organization of things, as far as having some collaborative community space. There were a few of the schools that we visited that really floated to the top as far as the way that the classroom wings were oriented with a communal space in the middle, referring to it as a learning commons, some things like that, flexible classroom spaces. Also some adjacencies related to the media center and the STEAM room. So that's science, technology, engineering, art, and math. So trying to group those spaces together so that they have some natural collaboration just by being adjacent to each other. And then also the social emotional learning, some of the things such as the area of respite that we want to build in, those are related to students who might be overwhelmed by certain spaces. So we're trying to incorporate those throughout the design. And we just wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of that for anyone who hadn't seen it already. And similarly, when Mike Perillo had done a previous summary, he had these guiding principles, and all we've done is pulled those out of the slides that he had from a previous presentation and placed them here, so that you can start to see some of the guiding principles basically that we're using as we start to lay out some of these different options. So this is not meant to be an in-depth review of this. We just wanted to give a quick little overview of it. Just to remind everyone, there are 12 different options that we're going to have to review. So this is a requirement of the MSBA in order to submit our PDP submission in May. We have to explore every one of these options. Some of them will be less desirable than others. Some of them we will not talk about in very much depth because we know that they're probably not ones that you're going to want to pursue. But there may be questions in the community about why we didn't look at certain things. So we try and investigate every single option that has been laid out by the MSBA, so that we know, yes, we have looked at that, and here are our results of what we found as we looked at each of these 12 options.
Katie, can we spend a minute on the matrix again?
Sure.
I spent a lot of time and I'm just truly struggling with some of these options. The first column I'm fine with. Stick with the middle for a minute. A2, you got a grade for Neary. How can you do A2 and not do anything to Neary? A2 doesn't make sense to me without a Neary choice. A2 says, yes, I'm going to base repair Woodward and do nothing to Neary.
That is what they're spelling out. And our answer might be very short, which might be to the effect of the building is not big enough to hold those 3 grades with the number of students that we have and the number of classrooms that are available. In order to fit those grades, you'd have to go down to option B3. So it may be a very short answer.
Okay, but look at the caption. This is where, look at your caption. Enrollment for grade 3 through 5 at a consolidated Neary. You don't say consolidated Woodward, you say consolidated Neary. So I assume that's what you mean, consolidated Neary. So 3 to 5 is at Neary, which means, I guess kindergarten 1 and 2 are at Woodward, right? And so what you're saying there, we're not gonna touch Neary, but we're going to base repair Woodward. I mean, that to me just makes no sense. So maybe what you're saying is we're gonna say it doesn't make sense, and that's why we're moving
Kev-
on pretty quick.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Kathy, I think what they're saying is they want to see a base repair of the Neary School, which is the first column, and the Woodward School. And so basically, we're going to give them a base repair of both. And I think that's the way they've set this table up, or at least that's our interpretation of it. So we're giving them a base repair of both schools. That's going to cover a lot of issues with building systems, exterior walls, roofs, all that kind of stuff. It really doesn't include any real instructional improvement areas. But for the purposes of the MSBA process, you have to go through it and say, okay, if we were to do nothing to the building other than keep it going for the next however many years, this is what it would take to repair the deficiencies it has today.
So I hear that piece, Larry. So to me, A2 belongs over under the first column with A1, because you're saying we're just going to do base repair of both buildings and leave the grade configuration alone, right?
Kathy, you actually bring up a really good point, and this table was provided to us by the MSBA, and maybe it's worth double checking the phrasing of consolidated Neary and Woodward, because to your point, Woodward is only a 2-grade school, Neary is only a 2-grade school. Having an extra grade really doesn't make sense if you're just doing a base repair on either. So maybe a base repair for Woodward doesn't make sense to consolidate both schools, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So I think I'm picking up on your point here, and I don't think I don't think we had really looked at it in those terms, but you're absolutely correct. It would be under the first column for just 2 grades, but still, yeah.
Okay.
So I was going to make a similar comment that this is the matrix given to us straight by the MSBA. I also find the wording awkward, using the word consolidated. I've had similar struggles with making sure that we understand exactly what they expect. So if I had my druthers, I would not word it the same way.
Okay, so I've got that straight, and it helps know this is MSBA, not you guys, because it will.
Yes.
Okay, now
This
go
is
down.
literally a
go
cut
down.
and paste of their diagram. This is the way it came to us in an email, which is why we keep showing it that way, so that we're not changing any of their language.
I just added the nice color, so that's
Okay, go to B2, B3. B2 says we're going, so again, this caption says we're consolidating Neary, right? 3 through 5, Neary. So we're gonna renovate and add a grade to Neary. And then I guess we're assuming we're adding a grade to Woodward with B3.
So what we would be doing is a test fit, and I think that's the. It's funny, and now I'm thinking we should start showing you the version that we've created, where we added a few notes, and one of those is basically under the Neary columns, that what it implies for the Woodward is when the kids move into that space, it's just a test fit of this is the number of classrooms, this is how it could work. We're not going to do anything to the Woodward building under that scenario. We'd be building at Neary, but you would want to know that there was space for your students to move into. So that's the part of the option that we're going to explore, but it's just on paper exercise.
But they're acting like B2 is separate from B3. To me, B2 and B3 have to go together. If you're gonna make Neary 3 through 5, you've added a grade. You're assuming, I think, that we're closing Finn with that one, and we're moving the grade to Woodward. That's what they want to see if you can do that, right? So those two have to go together. So I don't see why it's B2 and B3. To me, it should be 1B. Okay, so that's my comment on that one. C2, C3, same thing. Here, it's new construction. So they want to see a newly constructed Woodward?
That is one thing that we have to play out. And as you can imagine, I think we will all figure out from the estimate that will come back that it is not a very cost-effective option, probably not a preferred option because of the age of the Woodward building. We are just responsible for spelling it out so that if anyone asks, why didn't we think that we could just do this at Woodward? We are saying we considered it. It was not a favored option for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Okay, and I know you're gonna show the Woodward stuff in a second as far as what it looks like. I just don't see how C3 is even possible, as a practical matter with what you've drawn. In other words, a whole new school. Yeah, I know you've shown, we can add 2 grades, but not 3. Okay, so that one, C3 makes no sense to me. Okay, now go over to the last one, right? Okay, so here, you're gonna show in a second, I don't want to steal your thunder, but that you could add on to Woodward at the back of it, right? And that's not an option here. We're not showing a consolidated Woodward with 4 grades. So even though you've shown that we could do it, it may not be very palatable, but we could do it. You're not going to show that one to MSBA because they haven't asked for that one.
We're going to show them everything that they've asked for in this diagram. That's if that's
But
what
you
you're
agree they
asking. I'm
haven't
not
asked
sure
for
what
a
you were
consolidated
describing.
Woodward with, well,
They
see,
have.
okay,
They-
okay, but look at it's the caption, I guess that's throwing me. It says consolidated Neary. It doesn't say consolidated Woodward.
Well, it says and Woodward Elementary School.
Okay, but not consolidated, Jason. I'm looking, that adjective's not there.
Well, but that's why they have the 2 columns. I'm not saying I agree with the chart. You got to remember, it goes back to what the district submitted. Originally, the district submitted a project under Neary in the eligibility phase. The MSBA came back and said, we also want you to submit for Woodward because you're talking about the grades that are currently at Woodward, right? That could be in play, which is then why they separated these chart, like column, like the middle column and the right column into 2. I wholeheartedly agree. Some of these scenarios just seem crazy, but I think we need to let the consultants play out the scenarios to prove out, I think, what a lot of us are thinking in our heads of what would happen. But I think we will see a scenario, Larry, Katie, keep me honest here, that shows how, if it's even practical, to have grades 2 through 5 on the Woodward Elementary School site.
I agree. We're going to see that, and that's C5, I guess. Okay, so maybe
Yeah.
I'm just getting hung up on the column because the column should say consolidated Woodward too, if that's what they really meant. But C5 implies that's what they meant. So, okay, that's all I'm going to say about the matrix. I just think it's flawed.
I think we're all in agreement
Yeah, I
on
don't
that.
think
Agreed.
that'll be the
But-
most unanimous vote we could take.
But I do basically think what their strategy is to say we've got 3 enrollment scenarios, 2 sites, and 3 repair, ad reno, or new construction options. And they're saying we want to see all of them. That's basically what they're saying, regardless of the columns and so forth. And we've done that before on different schools.
Okay.
Denise, I'm going to take your question, and then let's let Katie, then after Denise asks her question, let's just let her go through her whole entire thing, right? Then we can come back to each individual slide as people have questions. So just to keep the flow moving here. So Denise, go with your comment or question, and then I'm
It's,
just going to let
yeah,
Katie go.
it's
I don't
not
know.
a question. Kathy, I totally understand where you're coming from. When you deal with Boston, because they're obviously approving and doling out the money, they want to be sure that when they answer for it, that anything that could imaginably be possible, even if it isn't,
Realistic.
it's not a bit, you don't have an ability to execute. They want to make sure that these are the scenarios that they want to have explained to them why or why not it will work. Whether it makes sense or not, this is how they operate. It's crazy.
Okay.
Seems like a lot of work for, when we already know, but that's just what we're up against.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Katie.
Jumping back in, so moving to the next slide. Some of you who attended the community forum may have seen this slide. This is really just to give an idea of our current estimate of the size of the different enrollments. This would be effectively for a new option, but just saying these are the required sizes of spaces. And this is really just meant to show you how the 3 compare to each other. We boiled down these really extensive spreadsheets that the MSBA asks us to fill out that has a lot of information on it. And we've just distilled it down to the most pertinent pieces. Things such as how many classrooms you're going to have in the different scenarios, so you can kind of see how they stack up against each other. Again, super high level, just so that you can understand rough square footages. And then, let's see, existing conditions. Here's the existing building, the way that it exists right now. We've included the color coding legend below to tell you what each of these spaces are. In later slides, a few of them have some labels on them to just kind of give some context. Everything's not labeled because it gets very difficult to read. But you'll see down here telling you what sort of spaces they are. The blue is the core classrooms. These are the gym. There tend to be more of the specialized spaces in green. And then the special education spaces and things like breakout rooms tend to be the ones in pink. So one thing that we wanted to talk about for the existing building is the existing structural system. So this building is built all in CMU. Kathleen, you can attest to that. Oh, she may not hear anymore. So the walls that are shown in red are the bearing walls. They have basically the structural system overhead, single-story building is spanning in one direction. So the main walls, the exterior wall, and then the corridor wall are bearing walls. And then circling each side of these classrooms, and then all the way around the center of the center space. The reason that this is important is that as we go to lay out the classrooms, for example, if you kept this as a classroom wing, currently the classrooms are a little bit small for the MSBA guidelines, but one of the items that has floated to the top that is desired for your particular educational program is to have these little breakout spaces in between each pair of classroom. They're about 150 square feet. And if you just put one in here, right, between these two classrooms without moving that wall, these rooms would be severely undersized or undersized more than you would prefer. So you'll see in some of the scenarios that we've done later where we're taking out these walls in between. And we're saying this because you might look at this and say, oh, look at all of this, square footage. If you blew out all these walls in between, you could be more effective with the use of those. But we're trying to make the point that the structural system would not allow that. Or it'd make it very difficult, very costly. So we wanted to show you quickly this diagram so that you can understand some of the limitations that we're working against as we're describing the existing building and some of the renovation options for it. So this is a diagram that we had shown at one point as far as very diagrammatic, conceptual. Here's how we could take the existing building and do some minor additions in order to make it more usable. So as sort of an additive process. We understand, the gyms here are something that are definitely undersized. They're not used for any of the community play or anything of that nature. And there is a desire to at least explore an auditorium. So we're describing putting those to the left and then adding on any of the new classroom wings to the right. So how that would play out, here's one scenario. And again, I'm going to zoom into this a little bit so that you can see it a little bit better. You'll see that we've reconfigured where these classroom walls are. You can see the original building underneath in gray. And this is what we are having to do to right size the classrooms, as I was describing, to have these breakout spaces in between. This configuration also allows for the neighborhood concept that we've been talking about that seems to be very favored by Greg and his team as far as keeping a grade together. And then you have this space in the center that's in yellow would be a learning commons space, a space that everybody could spell out. All the classrooms in that grade could use it for special assignments, just gathering, that sort of a thing. So here's the gym that we were talking about adding and the auditorium. Adaptive PE was one that was desired to be adjacent to the gymnasium, OTPT nearby. Other parts of this, the cafeteria and the kitchen basically stay where they were. So that's an effective reuse of that space. And then we're reusing the gym for some of the larger, perhaps taller spaces like the media center. We can take advantage of that gym volume. So that is one scenario on how you could do a minor addition for a 305 enrollment.
Katie, in every case, the superintendent's office is moving out of this building, correct?
That's correct. Yes. Moving on to the 450 and 610, we're using the same concept as far as the gym and the auditorium addition, and also this cluster in the left-hand body of the existing building. And what we just shown as far as the 305 option, but in order to make it the 450 or the 610, we could be adding on here on the end. We'll zoom in again so you can see it a little bit better. And this is, you know, a slightly more refined option of that classroom neighborhood that I was describing, just building it here on the end. And then if it were a 610, you would have a second story that mimics this as well. So you'd have some stairs and an elevator and a two-story space in the addition if it was the 610. This is how you could achieve either the 450 or the 610. And then, so another way you could do this is to take down that entire wing and build something brand new. This would be reusing half of the building, adding on the gym addition, and then reimagining what the classroom wings could look like. What we've shown here would be for a 2-grade configuration, you could have grade 2 and grade 3. Again, this is that neighborhood sort of configuration. We're not showing all the classrooms within, but it would have those little breakout spaces. The yellow space in the middle is that learning commons that we were describing. You have an opportunity here that you could have some sort of outdoor classroom, some sort of open space looking out towards the wetlands. So this is sort of a half and half. You're using half of the existing building and renovating it, but then also adding on a new wing for both the common use spaces and for the classroom area. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to go through all of these quickly, and then we can come back, as Jason had mentioned, and talk about each of them. So jumping to Woodward, here's the Woodward site, which you are probably all familiar with. This is where the building currently sits. This diagram is important because what we're showing here, this lot of land that has the A in it is the Choate Memorial Park. This land is deeded so that it can only be used for playing fields, which means that if we were to entertain any sort of renovation or new building on this site, we cannot build into that area. And I believe it extends into this one as well. So this is just making the point that we are limited in where you can build into the area immediately around the existing building. So we did do a test fit, and amazingly, it actually is able to fit, whether or not it's exactly desirable as far as being really close to the property line. There are a line of trees along here that buffer between the abutters that they would probably not love cutting down. And there is a little bit of a grade change here that we would have to contend with. But it does in fact fit with a couple of minor adjustments, like making the cafeteria slightly bigger so that it would fit the new enrollment. This diagram, any of the spaces that have the crosshatch through them are spaces that will remain. That's partly for understanding the diagram and also for our estimators to understand which spaces are just sort of being repurposed versus what's being added. So this would be for the 450, you would have a single story addition, and for the 610, it would be a double story, similar to the other. And then moving into some of the Neary new construction options. So these are all imagining 610, but similar to some of the other ones we showed you, we could scale it back a little if it was the 450. We're just trying to sort of vet the big ideas on the site and how we might be able to arrange the spaces. So this one is looking at a similar sort of gym, cafeteria, those common use spaces being here in this large block, and then having 2 academic wings that are parallel to the wetlands and sort of face out into the wetlands. This is how that space could play out. You would have a media center, a double height media center here at the sort of the juncture of those 2 academic wings, common space for everyone to come together. a little bit of a knuckle that joins it, and then a building here that has cafeteria, kitchen, some of the spaces that the community might use. This would help for security, that, you know, after hours, you could close off this part of the building. You could have access to just the auditorium, the gymnasium, those sort of things. And then playing off of that scheme a little bit, taking a similar take on it, but the central bar where all of those common use spaces are is rotated 90 degrees. And this just allows you to organize the space a little bit differently. It allows different flow through the building, the way that the corridors run, how far you might have to go from A to B, depending on where you are, puts the auditorium front and center. Depending on where the parking configuration worked out, you could still have access to the gymnasium space, but it's sort of centralizing things and making a different flow within the building, and still taking advantage of the wetland view. You also have these little spaces in between that could be, it's nice green space, it's nice natural light coming into both sides of those classroom wings. Maybe not necessarily a play space, might distract from the classrooms, but it's always nice to have, you know, the views and the natural light right outside both sides of this classroom wing. And then our third scenario rotates those classroom wings 90 degrees so that you're creating this big courtyard space in between. This one is quite wide, so maybe it could actually be some sort of play area, or might not be as distracting, maybe some outdoor classrooms. And then putting all of those common spaces right at the forefront, so that as you're approaching the building, and then for any of the community use, you know, those spaces are right as you enter. So here's how that could look. The auditorium here on the front corner, and the gymnasium, those are the things you'd be accessing at any time after hours, and orienting these classroom wings. Again, with the neighborhood scenario, this could be a grade per wing. And then the things that all the students need to use, such as the cafeteria and the kitchen, are more centrally located here on the first floor, and then going up to the second floor. One thing that this scenario does a little bit differently than the others is we do have the media center on the second floor, along with, as I was describing before, some of those adjacencies that we heard that were desirable to have, such as the STEAM, the art, and the music, all in this central location. So that those are the scenarios we wanted to show you today. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Happy to jump back to any plan if anybody wants to talk about one specifically.
Can you just roll back through all of the options for the new school real quick?
Sure. So that's option, we've got them labeled up here. Option A, with this scenario, let me just show you the plan that we've actually sketched out. So that's option A. Then we have option B. And then finally option C.
Then what about new school with 350 and, excuse me, 310 and 450?
For the basically, if this could be a 310, it would just be a single story. For a 450, you'd have an additional classroom wing, and then for 610, yet another. So we're basically double stacking when there are classroom wings. That helps with the footprint of the building, not taking up too much space on the site. And the organization of it, we're really looking at sort of that central area organized similarly, no matter how many students you have. These are preliminary ideas as well, so we're still going to be massaging these spaces around a little bit, but this is sort of a concept of the siting and how it would sit on the site.
So this is to ask people if you have questions or want to go back to anything, to just raise their hand. There's no votes we're taking tonight, right? Katie, if there's any specific feedback you need from the group, please, speak now so we can provide that. The other thing, Katie, just a clarification. when you did the Woodward example, right? You have not looked at parking yet, right?
That's correct. We have not.
Okay. Versus like the Neary site, right? Like in any of these new scenarios as an example.
Yes.
And you don't need to be probably an expert to realize the parking is going to work. It's just a matter of where you put it, right? Versus Woodward, there may be still a concern about parking that you'd have to address, even if you weren't concerned about the neighbors, you weren't concerned about the tree line and all the other considerations you already pointed out, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that might actually be one of the considerations that makes, you know, Kathy, you were asking about a brand new 610 scenario on Woodward. There may not be enough land there to accommodate the parking that would be necessary. We haven't overlaid the parking onto that yet. So that's another layer of information that we're going to include in these studies.
You will do that before the PDP goes in?
We would include some basic scenarios, especially for our estimator to know, you know, they would need to understand what was moving. So yes, we'll have some very sketchy ideas.
About the parking.
About the parking, yes.
And Katie, just to chime in, and I apologize if you did mention it, but obviously we're tearing down the existing Neary in a scheme like this, and in its place replacing the fields. Just to kind of speak to some of the comments that we received in the community forum. So just so that's clear that, you know, we're losing this field space over here, but in place of the existing building in some scheme, we would have playing fields there.
That's right. We'd have the playing fields, we'd have the appropriate amount of parking. So you'd have different parking counts depending on which enrollment you had. And also septic, if that needed to be enlarged according to the scenario, we would have to do all that work as well.
Have you determined that a base repair is going to trigger ADA in both cases?
It's a requirement of the MSBA scenario is to bring it up to code requirements. And we've already done an accessibility review of the building, and we have a report that will be included in the PDP from our consultant that talks about all of the different aspects of the building that would have to be upgraded.
Yeah, it's highly unlikely that the estimate would come in less than the threshold that requires a full ADA upgrade. I can say that.
But it sounds like MSBA says you got to do it anyway, no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So either way, you have to do.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I would like to see a scenario of trying to keep half of Neary, especially the gymnasium and kitchen side. I think that's used for a lot of other activities and extended day or different things like that. So I mean, it's kind of a hybrid of the new school, but keeping half of it. If that makes any sense.
Yep. That's what we were aiming at for this scenario. So I don't have my tools open, but this center portion of the building is existing to remain. Obviously, it would be refitted with all the appropriate HVAC and, you know, fire suppression, that sort of thing. But we're trying to make best use of this building, this portion of the building. So the cafeteria, the courtyard, you know, the corridor walls, like we were describing, that are load bearing. And then just working within that to carve that space up a little bit. So that's what this scenario is trying to do. In fact, it actually saves most of the building with just taking out some interior partitions. So this one is a little bit of a hybrid. Were you thinking of some other version, or?
It could be even with just that standalone piece with not much of an upgrade, right? Just kind of a standalone building with it, even using it for art or something that doesn't need a full renovation and an upgrade. Just basically, when we finish the new building, instead of demolishing all of the existing building, keeping half of it.
So that doesn't sound like what's here, Katie. I'm hearing, Andrew, you're saying you want to keep.
Yeah, like if you go to the new construction, one of the new construction ones.
Okay, yeah, that all right.
You're talking about.
You need to go to options.
What are the other options?
Yes.
Yeah. It's basically once you build this, keep half of the old building.
For use by the school or?
Used by the school as an auxiliary building for different things, or even, if the school doesn't have a use for it, maybe the town has a use for it. But not spending MSBA money if that is the case, of course.
I think when we layer on some of the parking and some of the other requirements, there may not be much of that space left.
Hmm.
We'll keep it in mind.
Yeah, interesting question. And one thing we
But-
have to be cautious about is with the MSBA is you couldn't, for instance, leave the existing building and say, oh, well, we're just going to repurpose that for other school uses. In their mind, you're replacing one with the other, and this has come up in other districts. But by not having classrooms left, if you slice it,
Correct.
it sort of falls into a different category in their thinking, I would imagine.
Where would you put the fields so Andrew, you're saying keep the left side, right?
The left side, I mean, you have some space for the fields in between that building and the new school.
Mhm.
But some other thoughts too on fields.
Is there a thought as to what the leftover piece would be used for?
I mean, I think it's still got the cafeteria, it's got the 2 gymnasiums, it's got the handful of classrooms. I think it would be a great art center, music center. You could keep the gymnasiums and put pickleball courts in them or something. They're not quite basketball court size, but you could put something smaller. I just think it's a nice. I mean, the building, while it might not be suitable for today's classroom environment with the breakout rooms and all that kind of stuff, from a auxiliary educational or even town use perspective, I think it's got a lot of value to the town.
Okay, well, we can certainly draw it. You guys decide if you want to look at it more.
But I think you would need to caution us as well, if that was something that started to get legs, you need to caution us on the pros and cons of how MSBA may view that, right? And through their lens, like you kind of just started to.
Yeah, I think when they look at it, if you say you were going to repurpose that for something else, it's if it were to be seen as sort of, oh, we're adding a school. We're just not, we're pretending we're not adding a school, but we were really adding a school. That's when districts get into trouble with the MSBA. In this case, the classroom wing comes down. You're basically saying we're going to keep some assembly spaces and convert it to a community center. That's probably easier for them to understand.
Okay. And that's your intent, Andrew, just to make sure we're all on the same page?
Yes.
Okay. All right. You good, Andrew? Just want to mute, so I'm assuming he's good. So Stephanie, you were next.
Katie, I was just curious, when we go back to the renovations,
Mhm.
given the load bearing walls, so part of the way the lens I'm looking through is relative to our educational plan and our educational vision, sort of what can we accomplish in each of the scenarios. So our current classrooms, if I recall correctly, are about 880 square feet in Neary. The MSBA allotment for a general education classroom would be about 950, I
That's
think.
right. Yep.
And so in a new construction, the classroom would be 950, and then we would have these small, like was it 150 or 125 breakout, those little pinks?
That's right. They're 150. We have them drawn as 150 right now.
So in this renovation, given the load bearing walls, what is the size of the classrooms in light blue?
So with this scenario, you'll see we would be removing the walls in between and enlarging them so that these classrooms would be 950.
Okay.
The explanation about the bearing walls was just to say why we couldn't say make the corridors a different width or something along those lines, because we're trying to maintain this load bearing wall here and the one on the other side of the corridor.
So
And
you can't quite create the spill out kind of effect of some of the other learning commons, but you would have just sort of that one central learning common
right.
in the corners.
Yeah, there's
And
certain
then-
limitations we're trying to keep just to not incur a lot of cost. I mean, you probably could do it, but you would be doing a lot of structural work to support the roof above. So
Okay, so but this would require a lot of structural work because you would have to move the load bearing walls.
We're maintaining the load bearing walls in this one. So
Okay.
this wall along here and the exterior wall, what we're moving is these partitions effectively in between so that you can enlarge those classrooms. It's just not probably the optimal scenario. We would need to look carefully, things like this, with the raked seating that's, in the music room would have to be removed. So there's a little extra work to get that to be back to a flat floor. So there are some other structural considerations where it's just not what you would build if you were building brand new.
And is the location of the castle classroom, and now I'm like probably going way too detailed, but are in some of the renovation sketches, I noticed kind of the adjacencies are not necessarily what we would envision in the ideal situation. And is that just a matter of like, for this first draft, kind of where it could fit, or is that?
It's a little bit of that, and we were trying to maintain a whole grade being in one area. So these classrooms, and then as they turn the corner, that's one grade. And just because of the nature of the geometry of the existing building, you'd love to have just one more classroom that you could put in there to have that, say, that castle room integrated. So it's a little bit of the, trying to put it into a box that's not exactly the right shape.
Okay.
We do have the opportunity as well. These are studies, and if that castle room really belongs in another area and we need to sort of shift things around, there's still some time for that.
Okay.
But yeah, we did our best with the, sort of shoehorning things into the existing constraints.
It's
Okay.
yeah, and to Katie's point, it's important to remember that all of these options that are going to be submitted with the PDP are strictly test fits. They're going to be diagrammatic. We won't really get into really starting to figure out what fits and where and how we'd approach that until we select the three options that will be presented in the PSR. And even then, we're not getting to that granular level of design that you would when, after a town vote. So yeah, I mean, to your concern, like with an ad Rono, you're not getting the ideal configuration that you would in a new construction, but it's trying to salvage as much as we can, save costs by not knocking down the entire building and starting new.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what that
Yeah.
is helpful, Andy. I think I was trying to get at where, we're not at that level of detail, but where do you make sacrifices on your educational vision because
Right.
you're trying to shoehorn into the existing space,
Right.
and what sacrifices are we okay with and not? And so I was just trying to understand that a little better. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll just add on to that. Part of what we were including, sort of that high level at the beginning, was to let anybody know who hadn't been a part of any of those sessions, which things were really sort of the guiding principles of that. And as we're laying these out, we're trying as hard as we can to make them match that. But that is an absolutely valid point, that some of these are going to fall short, especially when you're working with the existing geometry. And as you just said, Stephanie, that's something that's going to have to be weighed a little bit. Is that a reasonable sacrifice, or is it just not fit the bill for your
Yeah.
needs?
And I guess what I would say to the committee is, and I know the other, district members are happy to answer questions about kind of those aspects of what we notice in the plans as compared to the kind of the educational vision and all of that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Roger, you're next.
Really a question for Larry, and it's related to Andrew's comment about the potential value that at least part of the existing building, Neary building, might have in the future, even if a new school was built. So, is the message, Larry, that if you really can't use this for education, if you will, in other words, you can't sort of build a new school and then sort of keep part of the old school, to use for school functions, but possibly if this was really a community building of some kind with community functions, that might be okay. Just trying to make sure I understood
Yeah,
what you're trying
it's
to tell us.
more you know, they go through very carefully your enrollments, sites, existing buildings and so forth. And what they don't want is for somebody to say, well, we built a new school and by the way, we're going to keep the old one going because we have such a need. And they want all that to be rolled into their calculus when they say, okay, these are the options that you should be studying. It's sort of interesting because if you said, well, we're going to keep the kitchen, the cafeteria, slide the auditorium over because the auditorium is not part of the MSBA program requirements for an elementary school. And a few other miscellaneous spaces that's community function. I don't know as they would have an issue with that. We'd certainly want to check with them. And I also wouldn't imagine that there would be a problem if you said, well, and you know, every so often the kids are going to walk across a courtyard and go and use the auditorium because that's our new school auditorium. It's interesting, and I think the best way, if that became a option that we wanted to work with, is to talk to the MSBA staff early and see what their issues and concerns would be.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Kathy?
So my first question is, why do we have a castle in this?
Castle,
Kathy? Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't you explain what the program is?
sure. Castle is one of our specialized programs for special education. So that was why I was asking about that. That is a classroom for a small number of students. That's part of our special education program. However, the students who are in the Castle program also are often integrated into the general education classroom. So our ideal scenario would be that, much like TLP, which is our therapeutic learning program, that it would be right there with the other classrooms where students can be going into integrated into the learning neighborhood.
Thank you, Stephanie. So a couple things back to Andrew Pfaff's point as far as trying to keep a piece of the building to the left. So we know that MSBA is not going to give us any money for the auditorium, correct? Wherever we put it.
Correct.
Right. Okay, so this is actually not a bad idea to at least look at this. As far as making that into some type of town space, including an auditorium that can be used for, a lot of things, not just school stuff. If we were to decide to only build a new 2-grade school, and then keep half of that, then that might be our community center because we haven't closed Fenn. If we close Fenn, I don't see how Fenn's not a community center. Building's got to be used for something. But if you didn't close Fenn, this might be an alternative for the community center. So I think it is worth looking at. So let me say that. Now, I want to get to what someone said a minute ago with the PSR. I thought only one choice was going in August. So we've got 3 that are going in?
No,
Sorry.
you end up with one choice.
1?
Yep.
Okay. Someone just said 3 a second ago.
Well, we still show that there was sorry. You guys will vote. I apologize. Before the PSR goes out, you will vote on whether or not it will be a base repair, an ad reno, or a new construction. My apologies. I misspoke, but it is one option that goes into the PSR.
Right. Yeah.
Period.
And so
One option. Right.
What we do is we're identifying options that go in with the PDP.
Right. I get that, but I thought
Here's all our
one went
options,
with
and then
PSR, but
Yep.
Andy said 3, so I'm just trying to make sure. In August, we will have spent the whole summer looking at all your work, and we will vote as a committee on which option of the 12 or whatever we
Yep.
want, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And that goes
Sorry about that.
Okay. And then the MSBA looks at that and we need them to agree with us.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So they could come back and veto what we have chosen.
They could come back and ask questions. I can't say I've ever heard of them vetoing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, unless it drastically does not meet the the educational program, that's the only case where I've had a project where they did have a lot of pushback. I think if we, do our due diligence through this process, and come up with a option that best meets that the educational program. I think, yeah, to Larry's point, they'll come back with questions, but as far as vetoing it, I haven't had that on any projects.
Okay, now cost, the estimator. I understand that the estimator can estimate fairly close, within a big range, the cost of new construction. How does an estimator estimate base repair cost and rental cost in a building as old as Neary without really understanding that building?
They're going to review the reports that we've given to talk about the age of the building. I'm going to be giving them a narrative that says, here are the things that are going to have to be, like, for example, new lighting throughout, new fire sprinkler, suppression system. And those they will do on a square foot cost. So it's a little bit, basically, we're going to be feeding them a lot of information to be able to give a still, I won't say broad estimate, but based on their expertise, they've done a lot of these buildings, a lot of buildings that are of a similar age. And then that combined with the narrative and the reports from our consultants, they'll sort of glean the parts that they need to give us an estimate.
And you've got that same info on Woodward? I know we've got it for Neary, but you've got it for Woodward also? We did not have our consultants go and review the building and do the existing conditions review the way that we did with Neary. That wasn't part of the contract. So the information that we have on Neary is a little bit more high level. Woodward.
I'm sorry, for Woodward is a little more high level. Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions so far?
One other one. Do we need to look at alternative sites at all?
We
Somebody's
did
at one of
actually,
the scenarios.
we did get information from your group about other sites in town. There's a single location that I believe is a bit too small. Sorry, I'm trying to remember.
It's behind. So Andrew, we gave them a listing of all town-owned parcels, and the only parcel that I think was even remotely large enough was the parcel behind the transfer station. But the access would be off of Middle Road, or I guess through the dump, which was not even big enough to build more than a police station when we looked at it for public safety. I guess, Katie, maybe to bolt on to Andrew's question though, is do you have to look at the Finn site at all as an alternative site? I know we can't connect the building, and I know we can't touch the building, but do we need to submit something that shows that, or are we waiting on kind of the legal decision given all the CPA funds that went into that site?
We do have to prove that we've looked at alternative sites. If the full Finn site is big enough to build a standalone building on it, including all of the parking and all of the other things that would be necessary, then we should at least sketch it out, right? To say, here's what it is. But we understand from the call with the MSBA that we aren't allowed to touch Finn. So that would be taking into account the building as it stands and the parking as it stands. I don't recall the full site as far as the property line off the top of my head, but I would imagine that there wouldn't be much of a site there to build an additional building and all of its parking and, subsequent requirements. So
I wouldn't underestimate that. It's a large parcel. It's fully developed, but it's all fully developed with pickleball, playground, and 4 baseball fields, with lights and all of that. So I think the thing we can expedite if you need it, there's been significant recent CPA funding that's gone into that site. I'm not aware, I could be wrong, of any deed restrictions on the site. So again, I think it may be a documentation exercise, but that was the only other site I was thinking of when Andrew asked the question, to be completely honest.
Jason, let me ask the question a different way and see if you were to take over what I believe is Mooney Park, is how Google labels it, which is the athletic area behind the Finn School.
Yep.
And we were to build the new 2 through 5, 3 through 5, whatever configuration there, and relocate all of those athletic complexes to the Neary site. Is that something that has some opportunity for you guys? And if so, then yes, we should be looking at that. In other words, the project would take care of the CPA funded athletics, and you would say, okay, the existing Neary site would become the new athletic field complex for the town and would become almost always athletics.
I will give one gating issue I see with that.
Mhm.
And it came up in the open forum, and I'm surprised Keith Lavoy isn't like jumping through his screen right now on this question. Is you don't solve any of the transportation issues.
Yeah,
Um,
fair. What,
right? In terms of you would still, unless you had independent bus routes for each school, right? Like you'd have to group the, you know, you still have Trotter and Woodward on the north side, then you'd have Finn and New Neary on the south side.
yeah,
It's you'd have to like you wouldn't get kind of that loop that I think is a potential huge benefit. Again, busing isn't shouldn't determine this though, right? Like, but that's just the one item that pops into my mind there. And then I think my own other, and I welcome the other members here, is it's right next to the Mass Pike. And I don't think we can underestimate that versus the Parkerville Road site is candidly a quieter site in less potential hazards. Those are two things that pop out to mind. But I don't know if others have immediate thoughts. I think Greg and his team should weigh in. Doesn't necessarily have to be tonight, but I know Greg's not here. But I don't know
well,
others
from
have
our
thoughts.
standpoint, just sort of carrying that through a little bit, from a pricing standpoint, a new building on the Mooney Park site is not much different price wise than the Neary site. So I think we can extrapolate that for practical purposes. But if you think there's enough opportunity there or possibilities, the MSBA could come back with a question and say, well, how come you guys didn't look at the Finn school site? And then we could address it at that point. I agree with you. Being next to the Mass Pike is not a good thing in terms of air quality and noise. But there's some mitigation that can go on with that. So in any event, it's an interesting question as I start looking at a fairly good size amount of land on that parcel.
But does anyone know the answer to the question about the CPA funding that came up in a prior meeting? And we can get town council to weigh in. Like, if you can't, like, we know there's recent CPA projects. The pickleball was just done a year or two ago. The lights were done within the last 5 years. Like, if I don't want to like go down a decision tree here, if like we're at a no to start.
What are you worried about, Jason? I mean, they
It's-
won't like it, but
I think if you use CPA funds for recreation, I think it's supposed to have chapter 61A or one of those protection.
it's 91 or something.
91 or something, yeah, protections, but I think it's more for land acquisition, but who knows?
But as long as so we've been through this, we've been talking about this with a couple of the properties. So as long as you replicate it, you're okay. But I would think that a couple things would make this one not palatable. If you were trying to do a big school, the 4th grade school on next to Finn, that means you close Woodward. And we know, while we don't want to close Woodward, we know that we got an empty building and we don't want to use that as community center. We know that we want Finn is more preferable. So I don't think the big school goes there because of that. Then do you put a 3rd grade school there? Well, what does that mean? So I don't think it works. Unless it's just a 2nd grade school and you keep them all open.
I was thinking more towards another parcel that is currently in private hands. That would be more of an eminent domain kind of thing. Was that ever looked at from a study perspective?
Various districts have looked at eminent domain to acquire parcels.
Okay.
It can be, as you can imagine, it can be pretty traumatic for the community. But sometimes that's the only way you get a parcel.
But we're not required to do that, right? I mean, we don't, that's not one of the things you have to go look at is buying land. It's gotta be something you have available, correct? As far as what you have to look at.
It's typically how we approach it is to say, what land does the town own? And then are any of those sized properly? And we sort of went through that, and Jason had sent us the information on the site behind the DPW that was considered for the police station. And Jason, I think we were still looking for if you guys had any information that help us understand why that wasn't appropriate. That would just help the documentation.
We'd probably have to link you up with Context Architecture, who was the designer at that time. They'd probably have something in their files.
Okay.
But I remember vividly, and this was in the very early stages of that. It was in the study committee, Kathy. It wasn't even in the building committee. It was eliminated because it couldn't hold more than 20,000 square feet, and there was egress issues. You'd have to go through a transfer station or go through a side road and get to a one-sided part of Route 9. So traffic flow was an issue for a building that would obviously have far less traffic than a school.
I mean, the Neary Trotter area has got a campus feel, and it is fairly safe. It's in a good location. So I just can't imagine parents would prefer the school to be built on Fenn versus there, or even if you could, the transfer station behind it.
But yes, our PDP report should indicate that we've looked at other sites and none exist.
That are within the town's control.
Correct.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, I wasn't really gonna make much of a comment as to what direction to go. However, if you take a look at those plans, we're making assumptions that a portion of the school can get into the 200-foot Rivers Act buffer. We haven't really verified how high that water table is. And even if we think we can reuse a portion of Neary School, if that school is 18 inches above the water table or 2 feet above the water table, I'm not sure we should be reusing anything. There's some environmental issues, the septic issue that ultimately just may force us to pick a plan that either works within the areas we're working with, or we do look elsewhere. So it's not 100% space. It's not 100% of what we're looking at these plans. There's some other stuff that may force our issue. So I want to make sure we're not ignoring that, and all the work hasn't been done yet. I would hope before we think about a new school and then reusing portion of Neary that we know exactly how much parking and where these fields are going to be replicated. Because I'm looking at it saying, oh, good grief, where the field's going to go. And I'm looking at those topo lines up to the west and south corner of the site, and we're not going to be wanting to push anything closer to that or closer to the septic field. So there's some other things that we just may come at us that we really aren't there yet.
Any other comments? Responses? Do you need any direction from us tonight, or has this discussion been what you were hoping to accomplish and bring us up to speed on?
I think we were really wanting to give you an update, especially since these options in some form are what we're going to send over to the estimator. So it's really more of keeping you all informed. We are happy to hear all of the comments that you've given us so far. We've got some good things to consider, and we will continue to develop these, and you'll be seeing them more in a coming time before we submit.
How does the estimator get paid?
Sorry,
How is the estimator getting paid?
he's under our contract.
Okay, so in other words, we don't need additional money for the estimator.
That's
'Cause
correct.
we only have $7,000
We'd be in
left.
trouble if we did.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay,
They're one of
Yeah,
our
no,
consultants.
He's
Yeah.
part of our team.
all right.
Okay. Last call on site options. All right. Any public comment? I'm seeing none. Meeting schedule, as Jim denoted and put on the screen, that's our meeting schedule for now. You get a week off next week, and then we're back at it 2 weeks from tonight. Again, if people have conflicts, please try to let me know sooner rather than later, given obviously the substance of these meetings is not getting any less. And, we're going to start talking numbers next time, which I know is going to be very exciting to some people, if not all of us. Everyone take a deep breath, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other business anyone wants to talk about? All right. With that, I will make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second,
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mark,
Aye.
Kathy,
Hi.
Denise,
Aye.
Roger,
aye.
Andrew,
Aye.
and I am I as well. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good
Take care.
night.
Thank you.
Bye.